It was always coldest just before dawn on the factory floor, before the machines woke up, when everything echoed. Boots on concrete, metal doors opening, voices bracing for another day. I remember the steam of coffee catching headlights through the grimy windows. I remember standing near the time clock that last morning, pinched by sleep and cold, feeling the weak buzz of the fluorescent lights above. We were gathered in a cluster, slouching near the supervisor's office, chatter dying as a tall man in a cheap jacket stepped out and called for silence. I already knew. There'd been whispers, now official. They said it was about budget cuts, but I saw how his eyes skipped over me to settle on Luis and then José. When he finally looked at me, he didn't even say my name. "You three," he barked, "come here. You're done." He waited for the protests, the ritual asking and wheedling, but I just nodded. He blinked, surprised, as I peeled off my badge and handed it over. Outside, dawn was scraping pink at the edge of the warehouses. My hands were shaking from a cocktail of rage and something sharper, humiliation. It wasn't just about losing my job at a machinery plant on the outskirts of Madrid. It was about what waited for me when I got home. My brother's smirk, Mama's sigh. I stood there for a second, the city chilling around me, and I felt a heat building under my collar. I pictured their faces, and I made a promise to myself, simple and silent. I would not stand here like this again. The other two guys shuffled outside, muttering. I didn't join them. I walked past them, past the cracked wall covered in flyers, and kept walking, hands in pockets. I let the sky lighten over the train tracks, dogged by my own thoughts. By midday, I was standing in the kitchen telling Mama the news. She didn't even stop chopping onions. She just pursed her lips and shook her head, flicking onion peels into the bin. My brother Carlos picked at his bread and watched me like you'd watch a pigeon trying to steal food from a busy plaza, amused, but just waiting for it to be shooed away. "So fired?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "Laid off," I answered, forcing my jaw to unclench. He grinned, sharp and toothy. "Guess you'll have time now for your masterpieces." I swallowed it. I'd barely told anyone at work about my plan, the drafts and models under my bed, my nights devoured by study and sketching. Everyone at home knew, though. They called it my castle in the air. When a cousin visited, they'd shout, "There goes the great architect." They'd laugh when I showed them my notebooks, and Mama always gave the same soft, resigned sigh. "Ay, niños, you are a dreamer." Choking on rage, I went to my small room. I pulled out the battered folder that held years of hope. I traced the lines of my latest sketch, a modest community center with sunlight pouring through slanted windows. Here in Madrid, buildings stacked up over each other in uneven lines, haphazard but still somehow alive. I wanted to make something that would stand. I spent weeks looking for work, taking whatever came, day labor on a construction site, evenings at a bakery. But my nights were always for building, sometimes on the computer at an internet cafe, sometimes in my head, drawing blueprints with calloused hands and tired eyes. I applied to the school 3 times, Escuela Técnica Superior de Arquitectura de Madrid. First rejection, grades. Second, incomplete portfolio. The third time I walked my application in myself, shoes scuffed, and handed it to the secretary. She took it with barely a smile. My family found out anyway. A cousin saw me, told my brother, who told Mama. "You embarrass us," Carlos spat that night at dinner. "The whole block laughs at your fantasies. People work jobs, hermano, they don't chase after nonsense." I gripped my fork so hard it bent. "Shut up." He laughed, "Gonna draw me a palace like gaudy little architects." Mama closed her eyes, sighing resigned. "Please, Hijo, you're almost 30, finish with these dreams already." That night I lay awake, angry and burning, listening to the traffic drifting up from the Gran Via. I looked at my cracked ceiling and made another promise. They would not break me. My dreams, as ridiculous as they seemed, were mine. The third rejection letter felt different. This time it was handwritten, a softer blow. "Your concepts are interesting but lack technical grounding. We suggest apprenticeship or practical experience." For weeks afterwards, I slouched in and out of the flat, sullen, silent. The laughter at home grew sharper. Then, in the blaze of asphalt heat one summer, I saw a flyer tucked behind a lottery ad at a corner store. "Architectural firm needs junior drafter. Experience not mandatory, willingness to learn essential." I called. The voice on the line was brisk, annoyed, but he told me to show up at 8 a.m. on Monday. I arrived to find a cramped office stacked with blueprints, battered computers, and the smell of stale coffee. My interview was watching a grumpy man named Senor Ortega sort through papers. "Portfolio," he barked. I handed my pile over, trembling. He leafed through the sketches. "Rough, not hopeless, work hard, start tomorrow." From that day, my life was a constant struggle between the office and Mama's kitchen, where Carlos still cracked jokes about my internship, and neighbors still smiled gently at my foolishness. Each day, Ortega assigned me the menial piles, tracing, copying, organizing files that seemed endless, but sometimes, deep in the afternoons, he'd stand over my shoulder as I traced shapes, grunting, "Not bad." Sometimes, when he left files on my chair late at night, they'd have a note. "Try it your way." In the third year, Ortega let me visit a worksite. We stood in a battered lot filled with dust, where a block of flats had just broken ground. The sun burned silver off the scaffoldings, and I watched the concrete pour, laying the bones of something hidden and alive. I felt it then in my chest, a surge of certainty. I knew what I wanted. Months later, Ortega handed me a new file, Social Housing Initiative. They want ideas for an old lot in Lavapiés. The city's offering a contest. My hands trembled as I took the paper. There would be a dozen proposals, all from established studios. But I stayed up every night drafting my design, refining it, pushing past exhaustion as I drew lines and calculations until my fingers ached. I watched the empty street outside my window turn gold, turn blue, fade again into the grey dawn before I forced myself back to bed. When I turned in my draft, Ortega didn't say much, just grunted, "Let's see if you've got anything." Months passed. I barely thought of it, lost in deadlines and office tension, a blip in the haze. Then one Friday a letter arrived, nearly discarded in a pile of invoices. I almost ripped it in half before I saw the stamp. The letter was short. "Your design has been selected for final review. The city would present the finalists to a public committee, and the architects themselves were to present." I sat on the sticky plastic chair in my rented room, staring at that letter for what felt like hours. When I broke the news to Ortega, he shrugged, "Don't embarrass me." But he bought new ink for the plotter. My family didn't believe me. When I told Carlos, he barely looked up from his phone. "Sure. When they build your castle, we'll all come live there, Prince." The day of the final was heavy with rain. I pulled on my only decent jacket and hurried through puddles past the old market. In the grand room at City Hall, marble columns glowed in the soft light and the air crackled with stress. The other architects, older, sharper dressed, hovered in groups, trading glances. I stood for a while, ignored, hands damp. When they called my name, I stepped up and unrolled my layout. There were stutters in my voice, but I spoke. I explained, the windows tilted to capture light even in winter. The communal square in the courtyard, a place for markets and children playing. How the brickwork echoed the old Madrid blocks, but cleaner, open, stronger. I studied the judges' faces, searching for a flicker. There was only quiet. A week later, Ortega called me, voice thin with disbelief. "You won," was all he said. I hung up and sat down, shaking. Outside, Madrid bustled through the heat and horns and cries of the street vendors, utterly untouched by my joy. The city put out a small press release, then a larger story. Within weeks, work began, surveyors and engineers, bulldozers rolling in where I had drawn lines with trembling hands. I never told my family. I figured they'd see it in the news, or not at all. 2 years later, they were finishing the last touches. Mama got sick. She was thinner, quieter, her voice hoarse on the phone. I went home more often, pushing past Carlos's smirks. The same flat, the same battered cups, the same cluttered sofa, but something had shifted around the edges. Carlos was quieter now, too. One afternoon, I heard his friend José in the hallway. "Did you see the new flats down on Cal Sombreraria? Fancy. Can't believe some local designed them." Carlos replied. "Probably some rich bastard from Barcelona." I said nothing. Someday, I thought, I'll bring them, let them walk through what they called my joke. The official unveiling came in May. A perfect blue sky spread over the rooftops, and the air was soft with promise. I sent invitations out of courtesy, not expectation. I barely thought of whether they'd come. But at noon, as the mayor shook my hand and camera flashes popped, I saw them, Mama, frail but somehow brighter, Carlos trailing behind, 3 neighbors whispering, faces wary. I led the group into the courtyard. The brickwork glowed honey gold in the sun. Generous windows spilled light inside. There were children running, nearby families calling through open doors. The square, just as I had drawn it, overflowed with the sounds of life. Carlos walked behind me silent. Mama pressed my arm, eyes shining. The neighbors, clutching purses, stared at the benches, the wide archways, the walls bursting with potted flowers. A woman I didn't know leaned from a doorway and called, "Is this your building?" In her beautiful, craggy Madroña, I nodded. She grinned and called her daughter. Look what the young architect did. Not so ridiculous now, eh? There was a rumble of laughter, odd and heartwarming. Carlos's pallor was unmistakable. I led them upstairs to the terrace. The city stretched out in grey and orange and green, alive under the sun. I handed Mama a sketch, the first one I'd ever drawn, battered from years under my bed. She touched it, fingers trembling. Carlos finally spoke, voice quiet, forced out of him by awe. "I'm sorry, hermano." I looked him in the face for the first time in years, really looked. The sarcasm was gone, replaced by something softer, raw. We stood by the rail, the wind shuffling hair and old grievances. For a moment, we just watched the life swirling around the square below. Mama drew in her breath and held my hand, squeezing. "You did it, my Hijo. You built it for all of us." I felt the old rage flicker, not destroying but lighting something deep, a slow forgiveness edged with pride. My dream stood solid, sunlit, beautiful. All of Madrid could see it, the truth of who I was and what I could do, even the ones who had never believed. I walked my family down through the courtyard, friends and neighbors pouring around us as laughter and music filled the new walls. The ridicule was gone, replaced by something warmer, respect, wonder, maybe even pride. And in the center of it all stood my dream, no longer ridiculous, no longer just mine, but something to shelter others. Here, in the home I'd built, Madrid seemed to breathe easier, as if the city itself had decided to forgive me too.